Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the December 14th special meeting of Council. The City of Parksville recognizes the people of the Coast Salish Nations and their traditional territory upon which we gather with gratitude. The first item we have tonight is the adoption of the minutes of the public hearing held December 7th, 2015. Do I have a mover and a seconder for accepting those minutes? Moved by Councillor Powell, seconded by Councillor Beale. Are there any errors or omissions? All those in favor? Thank you. That is carried. The next item that we have on tonight's agenda is the minutes of the council meeting held December 7th, 2015. Do I have a mover and a seconder for those minutes? Moved by Councillor Powell, seconded by Councillor Beale. Are there any errors or omissions? All those in favor? Thank you. That is carried. The next presentation, and I want to make a few comments before Mrs. Lovegrove gives us the background on the issues regarding the update on the 2016 to 2020 draft provisional financial plan. This is not the 2016 final budget meeting. The 2016 budget discussions will continue in the new year, I believe sometime in, do we have a date yet for January? We'll go back in February. Okay, so please keep that in mind when discussing tonight's agenda. And remember that after we go over, there'll be a recapitulation of where we're at with the 2016 budget to date, and then we're going to get a bird's eye view of the budgets for 2017, 18, 19, and 20. So keep that in mind. So Mrs. Lovegrove, would you please go ahead and give us the background, first the recapitulation of the 2016 budget in terms of where we're at now, and everybody should have a good idea of what that is. You are all at the meetings, and continue on with the 2017 to 2020 budget. And after that presentation and questions from council, we're going to go to the audience for comments and questions. Mrs. Lovegrove, if you would, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Tonight, we're just basically going to look at the approved budget adjustments, the approved 2016 spending packages. Those are the items that we're just going to have a brief overview on. And then from that point, pending items, the 2017 to 2020 items are still items that need to be have some decisions made on. Then we'll just take a look at the 20-year capital summary, the 2016 provisional financial plan as a whole, and the accumulated surplus levels. Then we'll look at the water fund and the sewer fund and the changes for the provisional plan for those. So to start off with, we're back in October 28th, we started off with some approved budget adjustments. The ones in front of you right now are the budget adjustments that Council has approved. So I won't go over them line by line. You can just read through them. And then since that meeting, at the last meeting, Council also added a few budget changes. And they were the low flush toilet rebate, the rain barrel rebate, and an additional amount for Canada's 100th birthday to bring it up to $40,000. During the last two meetings, we've also approved several spending packages that are pertinent to the 2016 year. Those are in front of you. For the operating spending packages is for a total of $329,000. And for the capital spending packages, you have approved $516,000 for the 2016 year. We still have a couple of pending items coming out of the last couple of meetings. Number one is the Morningstar Golf Tournament. There was some discussion last time, and it was just kind of nothing was approved, so we're bringing it back for council discussion again.
Maybe we could stop here. Councillor Greer?
Thank you, Your Worship. I can make a motion if you want at this time to approve that.
That's within your.
Okay.
We did discuss it at the last budget meeting.
Yeah.
Is there a seconder for that motion for the Councillor Beale? Any discussion on that motion? I think I don't need to refresh council's memory. This is a very large national tournament. There's about 1,000 people expected to come to town. The Morningstar Golf Course is pitching it as perfect Parksville in terms of the location. I've okayed that with Electoral Area Director Stanhope because it's not physically in Parksville, but that's okay. So any discussion on that? Seeing no discussion, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. Okay. And I believe that on the capital program, the Highway 19A Wells Street sidewalk refurbishment, I believe Mr. Figuera has some update to bring to us on that. We had a long discussion about that at the last meeting. So would you give us an update on what this is all about? I know there was some concern about the relevancy of it or the validity of it, given it comes around the corner, and some councillors thought that sidewalk wasn't in that bad shape. So on that note, would you please give us an update?
If I may, Your Worship. So in investigating a little bit further the Wells Street sidewalk refurbishment, the $95,000 is for a full replacement of the existing sidewalk, basically the portion on Wells Street down, and then on the portion on the highway, and then it comes around the corner and down to the lane, the first lane. So it's replacement of that, and it's due to a insurance report that was done citing some safety issues there. So that's why that sidewalk's going to be replaced. The money that was identified in the capital plan for Wells Street, that was for, I believe it's in 2022 right now. That was identified as temporary improvements to sort out the parking issues and the pedestrian connectivity along Wells Street. It basically consisted of some asphalt pavement work, some asphalt curbs both sides, an asphalt sidewalk that was to run the full length of Wells Street on the east side to give some continuous connectivity there. And the rationale behind the temporary works were due to over the past 5 years, there's been roughly 3 developments that have occurred along Wells Street that and involved with those projects, they had to do frontage improvements. Assuming that trend continues, in the very near future, we could very well have additional developments happen along there, and the thought is that you don't really want to, if there's significant signs that there'll be development occurring, consolidation of lots, stuff like that, we're of the opinion that we don't want to finish off the street and then have to rip up everything again to put in the letdowns in the right place and put in appropriate services. And we'd have to dig back into the street if lots got consolidated. We have to dig back and cap at the main the services. You don't want to be doing that into a brand new street. So that was kind of the rationale there. That's why it was put there. There is certainly the possibility of moving it forward and combining it with the sidewalk work that needs to be done. But that's going to bump a few projects down the line till about 2019. We kind of get back on track. It's just our level of resources that we have. We need to bump things to offset dropping a project in 2016 that isn't there right now.
Any questions for Mr. Figuera? Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you very much for your report. So what was the cost for the temporary improvements?
If I may, Your Worship, through Councillor Powell, I'll just look it up here. So along with the cost of the actual road works, we have $125,000 budget in there. But in conjunction with that, we've got what we call permistrand, or it's like a fiberglass water main down there of questionable material. And that's for $275,000. Those two projects should really be done together. So that's a total of about $400,000 to do the works along that street. That's including replacing the permistran water main plus doing the temporary roadworks.
Thank you. So I just would like to say that I feel very strongly that this should, like, if anybody's been down Wild Street recently, like, it's busy and it's unsafe. Like, it's unsafe for pedestrians, it's unsafe for cars, it's very narrow, it's a hodgepodge of sidewalks and ditches, not ditches, pardon me, but pathways along the road. I think that $400,000 is a small price to pay just for the upgrades to get that so people can walk safely down the street. I think that 2019 isn't that bad. You didn't mention which projects you would have to drop, so it's kind of like making a decision half blind. Could you tell me?
Yes, if I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Powell. So you want me to talk about the projects that would be bumped? So in reviewing the capital plan, basically we would have to bump, starting in 2016, obviously, the construction of Wallace Street, Morrison to the end. And that's Wallace Street, Morrison to the end. So the driver for the Wallace Street project was an AC water main replacement program to remove the existing 100 AC diameter water main. We tend to put a high score in terms of our desire to replace water mains on the fact that it's asbestos cement water main pipe. It's just recently with the Temple Street project, we had 2 breaks there, and it's just one break and one significant leak, and it has an asbestos cement water main. Fortunately, we're on that road repairing that water main right now. So, but it's just that some of our asbestos cement pipes were adopted into the city, were built a long time ago when we didn't have the stringent specifications that we do have now. Some of them aren't bedded properly. And if any kind of movement at all happens, chances are you're going to get a leak and possibly a break. That's why we kind of have them listed up as very important things to consider replacing. So that was one. It was built circa 1963, so it's as old as me. And we figured it it could really use some replacement right now. So. Not me, but the pipe. Yeah. So that's why it's there. In our opinion, it's there. That's what we recommend it to be replaced.
Okay, well, we'll give you one more follow-up, Councillor Powell, and then you
And so
pass it on.
the Temple Street, we're already doing an upgrade. So why is that on the capital works? Because we're already doing the whole street upgrade, aren't we?
If I may, Your Worship, that was one of the drivers to do Temple Street, was our confidence level with the water main on that street. We wanted to get it replaced, and it's a good thing that we did because some fairly, I would call, fairly insignificant movement has caused one break and one significant leak there already.
And so really the only one we're moving to 2018 is the Wallace to Morrison?
Right now, that's... If we're going to move, there's other projects. I just picked on the one that I thought was kind of the least painful to move in terms of the one we were, amongst the other ones, the one we're least concerned about moving, although obviously our recommendation is to leave it where it is. But that's the one I picked for there. And then I can go on to our next one. If that is bumped into 2017, the next one to be bumped would be Wren's Road, half road upgrade. It's the portion of Wren's Road it's really only half a road, and it's kind of near a school. So a couple of reasons why we're doing it. How it scored high for us to do it. Pedestrian connectivity, get a full road in there so that the cars aren't so close going past one another near school. So that's why we did that one. That was kind of the driver on that one. However, amongst all the other ones, that would seem the most reasonable one to bump if council so chooses to bump one. Then I got one more, and then we're pretty much back on track in 2019. The other one would be Pym Street, Forsyth to Humphrey. Let's look at the driver for that one. Again, this particular piece of road, 1969, 300 AC water main. It's one of our critical water mains. It's a distributor, what we call a distributor. If that went down, it would affect quite a few people and the operation of our system. That's why we scored it so high.
Councillor Beal and Councillor Salter.
Thank you, Your Worship. Again, through to Mr. Figuera. I'm just curious, with the costs for the improvements, which included the water and going back to Weld Street now, you mentioned road improvements, but was that including the temporary asphalt sidewalk?
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Beal, yeah, that includes the temporary sidewalk, temporary curb both sides, a little bit of asphalt work, maybe a catch basin or two to make that work. Yeah, and then combine it with the replacement of the existing sidewalk on the highway and Weld.
Councillor Salter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. So I have a couple questions. You were talking about, you spoke about the 2016 Wallace Street water main asbestos pipe, but then the Wren's Road and the Pym, were those also designated for 2016? Or what year were they designated for?
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Salter, the Wallace Street right now, the construction of Wallace Street is scheduled for 2016. The construction of Wren's Road is scheduled for 2017, and the construction on Pym is scheduled for 2018. So the idea is if we drop Weld Street into 2016, those three other projects would get bumped 1 year.
And so follow up, and through you. So I actually would support the water main and switching out that asbestos pipe on Wallace in 2016 rather than putting more sidewalks on Weld if it's one or the other. Having said that, though, with Weld Street, I actually spoke to a couple of people who were on Weld Street when those sidewalks went in, and those sidewalks are about 15 years old on the ones on Weld that go around the corner. So I'm wondering, I know that there's a problem with the piece on the highway side, because of the holes, I guess, with the trees coming up. Mm-hmm. Could those not just be corrected for now, rather than pulling up that whole sidewalk all the way up to the lane? Just fix what's on the highway side, and then use those additional dollars to move up Weld with whatever's left, as far as we can get, I suppose, with a sidewalk.
If I may, Your Worship, correct me if I'm wrong, Councillor Salter, I'll throw it back at you. What my understanding is that you're saying, so increase or replace the sidewalks on the highway, and then leave the sidewalks on Weld Street, the existing ones that are there that have been identified in the insurance report. Leave those in place there. And then use the money that we would have used to replace that to do what?
To carry on with whatever you can up Weld, to get sidewalks up Weld. But you said that there was an insurance report, but in the last meeting we had, what we were told was that the problem was on the street side, on the highway side, where the trees, because the trees were lifting the concrete.
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Salter, I think that report, Mike, if I could refer it to Mike, I think that report identified all that sidewalk as being an issue.
Yeah.
Clarify.
Sorry, if I may, through your worship. There's several issues along all of that section of that sidewalk. Most of it is to do with the tree roots lifting up the sidewalk panels. The sidewalk panels are they have an intricate design feature to them, and there's a lot of saw cuts. And what it does, the actual tree roots are popping and causing significant trip hazards that have been identified in our municipal insurance report. We could mitigate those, which would result in obviously higher operation costs for the next several years until we do those projects. The quickest, easiest way to mitigate that would be debeautification, which would be a complete removal of the trees that are causing the problem. And then you'd have to reestablish something in a temporary basis, which would be simply asphalt would be your cheapest product to put in place until the full works are done.
Any further questions from members of council? Councillor Oates?
Thank you, Worship. Maybe to the CAO, do we have an understanding of what the average claim is when someone would sue us because they tripped on a faulty sidewalk?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Oates. We don't really have an average claim because each one is dependent upon the level of damage that the person who falls sustains and whether or not the insurance association actually accepts liability for that fall. But we have had some claims that have been small ones of about $1,200, and we've had other claims that are more expensive in the $7,000 range. So it just depends on the level of injury of the person and whether or not the MIA, through its investigation, determines liability on the part of the city.
Follow-up?
Do we, is it your opinion, Vaughn, that this is the most risk liability with respect to our infrastructure? Are we really got our neck stuck out here by not fixing this?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Oates, by not fixing the sidewalk? I think it's important that we certainly, as it's been identified in a report to us as being a hazard, certainly important to have it in our plan to make sure that we have a plan to, in the fairly near future, to do something about it. As the Director of Operations was indicating, a compromise may be for the city to delay the repairs, assuming that we go in and do some works to make sure that those tripping hazards are dealt with. It's going to be, as the Director of Operations said, a little bit higher maintenance, maybe over the next 4 years until the project comes up. But we're going to have to put a little bit of effort. So my recommendation is certainly not to leave it and do nothing. My recommendation is probably to take some steps, at least from a maintenance perspective, to do something about it. Deal with the liability, not necessarily in a permanent way, but deal with it until we can get to it in the capital plan and align it with where the weld is right now in the capital plan. That's my recommendation.
Councillor Powell, Councillor Beal, and Councillor Salter.
Thank you, Your Worship. And so a document was sent out to us, and it's got Public Works, Jensen, Bagshaw, Island Highway, Jensen, Corefield to Bagshaw, SS Jensen, Bagshaw to Highway 19A. Is this the Jensen extension route? Is that what these are about? And so I see they've moved from 2018 to 2016. I'm not prepared to make a decision regarding Weld Street sidewalk refurbishment. And as a standalone decision because this comes later in the budget. And so there's monies that are available there just by moving that up to 2016. That's $500,000. And we could put that towards Weld Street, which is $400,000, and still save $100,000. So I don't think we should be making this in isolation.
Councillor Beal.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I'd like to say, regardless of the final decision about the current hazardous sidewalk, and I think we all agree that it's most unfortunate that it has to be redone. That is sad. But I do think that putting in some sort of temporary sidewalk is really an important thing to do on Weld Street. At the top of the street, we have the Lions housing unit there. We have a number of people who are using walkers, elderly, and yet, you know, anybody of any age can trip and fall as they're walking down the road, and the cars are parked and so on. So I do think it's a really important street to address. It's certainly one that I hear about more than other streets downtown, and it has a lot of pedestrian and vehicular traffic on it. So I would like to support efforts to do something about Weld Street sooner rather than later, and I really appreciate the idea of something temporary with an asphalt sidewalk. I think that would be great in the meantime. I do appreciate Councillor Powell's mention, though, that we need to look at everything and look at the decisions that we make around Jensen Street and others before we finalize it.
Councillor Salter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to make a motion to refer this back to staff to review for possible mitigation rather than doing a complete, as you had stated, Mr. Figuera, that we take a look at what mitigation we can implement rather than changing the entire sidewalk. See how much we could save by doing that, and then consider that for a sidewalk if we have extra or whatever we want to do with any additional amount, if there is any. So that would be my motion. To refer this back for review by staff for the mitigation piece.
I have a seconder for that motion. Your second again? Okay. Any discussion? Any further discussion on the motion? I always get confused with the referrals and the tabling and the. Okay. So the motion has been referred. Staff, you're clear on what that referral is? Didn't think there was a vote. All those in favor of the referral. All those opposed. Okay, so that is defeated. Any further comments on what we've got before us now in terms of the 95,000? Well, does anybody want to make a motion with regard to the 95,000? Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Your Worship. Obviously, this is what city's recommending and what our engineer is recommending, so I'll make a motion so that we can get on with things here for the 95,000.
I have a seconder for that. Seconded by Councillor Oates. Any further discussion? Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. I won't be supporting this because I don't think we should be looking at it in isolation. I think we need to be looking at it with the Public Works for the Jensen extension.
Okay, any further comments? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. Okay, so now where are we at? We are moving on. We're moving on to other items to be considered. First of all, I might point out that the DNA testing, that's a provincial download. I've been reviewing some of the correspondence I've received from the District of Kent. They've complained to the minister concerned. I believe it's Minister Anton, and I want to have a further look at that. We may have an item here to refer to AVICC in terms of the DNA testing costs. I'm going to try to explain this. We pay 70% of our for the for the RCMP, 70% of the total cost. When we get to 15,000, it goes up to 90%, but for the time being, we're at 70%. What we don't know is where this DNA testing is going in terms of the 70%. Am I correct in saying this, Mrs. Comas? So, unfortunately, I don't think, I mean, we'll vote on it, but you can't, we've got to pay for it. It's an obligatory cost that's been downloaded on us, but we'll certainly complain about the downloading through the Association of Vancouver Island Coastal Communities and the Union of British Columbia Municipalities. And I don't think we're the only ones, because $4,000 is not a lot of money for Parksville, but I would imagine a city like Duncan or a city like Victoria or a city like Vancouver, I don't think they have RCMP, they have their own police forces, but any larger municipalities, it's going to be a lot more than $4,000. So we'll get on that. And I think the overall concern about downloading anyway is a valid one. And this was done without consultation. We've confirmed that. This was simply brought to us from on high that you must pay for it. This is the new, this is the latest thing that we're giving you to do, that you have to pay for. So on that note, I guess formally we have to call for a vote. Yes, go ahead.
I'm not so sure that we do need to call for a vote on this. This is something that's going to be downloaded on us. Why validate it through a vote? You know, if this bill comes and we have no choice but to pay it, but you know, to validate it beforehand, saying we're going to do it, I think that only just encourages the other levels of government to download even further. So, if it's a bill that we have to pay, then we'll pay it the way we pay our other bills. To give the province the go-ahead, or the feds to go ahead, or whoever it is to go ahead after they didn't consult us, and then after the fact say we agreed to it, we budgeted $4,000 because of the increased cost. I think that would be counterproductive to our end goal of having the downloading stop. So, you know, if it's an item, it's part of regular bill payment, which is what I understand it is, then I'm not, you know, unless we need to have a budget line for it, I'm not supportive.
Mrs. Comas, please.
Your Worship, I just wanted to mention that the reason that this has been put here is because we don't have a budgeted funds for the payment of that bill. So when it comes in, then our option would be to come back to council to request funding from perhaps surplus or other funds in order to pay that particular bill, because we haven't budgeted for it, just so the council's aware.
Would that would be satisfactory? That would. So we won't vote on it. Does that council, is there a consensus among councillors that we don't vote on it? Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Worship. I think Ms. Comas is saying that it's a budgetary number that we should put in there. Otherwise, we've got to find it somewhere.
But we can get it.
But it's only $4,000, so it's not a big deal.
We can get out of our surplus if we need to be. Okay.
Yeah, so I go along with that.
Okay. Everybody else agree with that? Is there any objection? Okay, so we'll leave it at that, and I'll get back to you after consulting more with staff about preparing a resolution for the Association of Vancouver Island Coastal Communities and the Union of British Columbia Municipalities on this downloading issue. The next item that was brought up was an issue that was brought up by Councillor Oates with regards to considering Wi-Fi in the downtown. So, Councillor Oates, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. All the information that I required is there in front of us here now. I move that it be removed from our budget.
I have a seconder for that. Councillor Greer seconds that gladly. All those in favor? Thank you. That's unanimous. We have an item called Wayfinding Design Plan by PBBA, and I just wanted to, before we go into discussion, I wanted to mention to you in a discussion I had offline with the executive director of the PDBA is that this money is being asked for. First of all, I don't think that $7,500 is the ultimate acceptable amount. It's negotiable, from what I can understand, but it's essential in the sense that the study that they want to do for the city, for the downtown area, is what needs to be on the signs. What information should be on the signs, and obviously the key locations of where those signs should go. So on that note, we'll begin the discussion. Any comments on the request from the PDBA? I remind council that we have a memorandum of understanding. We're partners, so any comments or questions? Councillor Greer and then Councillor Beal.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll move that we accept this plan.
Do I have a seconder for that? A seconder for that? Okay. Any comments from members of council? Councillor? Okay, so Councillor Beal and then Councillor Salt.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would like to support this, an amount up to $7,500, but with the understanding that this is within a community and regional context as part of the wayfinding design plan.
Councillor Salter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I have a few questions. I'm wondering, with it being wayfinding and being community and regional, are we the only ones putting in the $7,500? Is there other monies coming from somewhere else to cost sharing? And if so, who and where?
The bulk of the money is coming from the PDBA. Could you tell us, PDBA are in the audience, what that amount is? What amount are you contributing to the wayfinding study? The question is, how much money are you contributing?
How much? What's the number?
So the answer is $30,000 by the PDBA, over and above what we'd contribute.
Follow up?
Pardon me.
Can I follow up?
Speak. I can't hear you. Follow up? Oh, yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Thank you. I was already on. So are you saying that you're going to put $30,000 into this wayfinding program, or that you have $30,000 and you'll be using a portion of that for the wayfinding? A portion. So would it be... That's my question.
Okay, Councillor Patterson and then Councillor Beal. Sorry, Councillor Salter, does that answer your question? Okay, I'll come back to you. Councillor Patterson, Councillor Beal.
Thank you, Your Worship. From what I understand, and that this is just the Parksville Downtown Business Association. Down the road, it can be looked at with the Parksville Qualicum Beach Tourism Association, with their program and everything. But right now, this is specifically for the study of the downtown and the wayfinding design plan and what they should look like and what should be on the signs. And I agree with the amount and of the $75,000 and would like to move that forward. 7,500, sorry. We'd really like that, but But it is specifically, I think that we just have to realize that it's the Downtown Business Association, and down the road, it will hopefully move forward with the community.
I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that the PDB are having those discussions with the Tourism Association. Okay, Councillor Beal.
Thank you. And you may have answered my question, because I was just wondering if there could be opportunities to work with, for instance, the Tourism Association. And when I mention community and regional context, it's just simply to allow for that and to understand that our downtown, because that would be the primary focus, obviously, but to have the understanding that it is within a community and regional context, so that eventually some of those elements that may or may not be in place depending on the design the consultant comes up with, but that awareness so that the downtown is oriented within that. And I think that that could benefit and be a real win-win-win all the way along. I see you nodding, so I think you follow me.
Councillor Salter and then Councillor Greer.
Oh, thank you. So do you have any idea then what the total cost or what the approximate total cost will be to complete this? Do you have any idea? To complete the project? Yeah. And so I don't think $7,500 is a lot, so I'm supporting that, but I would really like to see you looking at more stakeholders as well, because I think the regional districts could also be involved in this when you're talking about wayfinding and if you're going to get bigger.
Okay, Councillor Greer.
Thank you. Just to clarify my motion, I would like to have up to $7,500 in there. Good, thanks.
Second. Are you okay with that? Okay. Any further questions on this item? Councillor Oates.
Just wondering what the reaction of the PDBA would be if we did it, structured it that we'd match dollar for dollar up to $7,500.
Well, the PDBA or the executive director's here tonight. What would... Councillor Oates.
I'm just, like some of the, I think if I'm interpreting some of the concerns are we the only one putting money into this? And you know, it doesn't sound like we are. I think it's a worthy project. I'd be more comfortable to know that we were you know, cost sharing it with the PDBA as opposed to funding a project, which yeah, I don't have a lot of detail what the project. We're going to hire a consultant to see what if could happen. That's a lot of money for that. But I do support a revitalization of the downtown. So I'm not sure how not supporting this would compromise our commitment towards that. It's just a comment. But you know, just a suggestion, if that would make people on council more comfortable, we could structure it as a cost share type thing where we match the dollars up to $7,500.
I'm hearing that that's not an issue for you. Mover and seconder, or is that, when are you going to, I'll get to you, Councillor Powell. Are you okay with that?
I'm fine.
Councillor Powell.
To think if I was going to say anything, because you know what, it could be costing us quite a bit more than $7,500, because I think it's going to cost up to around $20,000, and so if we're matching dollar for dollar, then I think we're going to be paying more. But I just had to say that. I know I'm the representative of the PDBA, but I'm a city councillor first.
Okay, so
The motion I made doesn't say dollar for dollar. It just says up to $7,500. So
we're going to leave it at that?
if they come in with $40,000, then I think they're on their own. Thank you.
Okay. If I don't see any more hands up, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Thank you. That is carried. Now, we're still not at the 7 o'clock mark. We're going to get to, I eventually want to get to the audience, because I know that there's a number of folk here tonight that have comments and questions for us. We're going to go over the 2017-2020 budget. Mrs. Comas, correct me if I'm out of line here, but you have to remember that in sometime in 2016 we'll be talking about the 2017 budget. So the purpose of this review is, it is what it is. It's a review. If it gives everybody a heads up, if you see something in the 2017-2020 budget that you're not madly in love with, or you want to comment on, please do so. But please remember that that we'll be reviewing once again at some point in time next year the 2017 budget, and eventually in 2017 we'll be reviewing the 2018 budget, and so forth and so on. So on that note, we're going to go through the 2017-2020 budget adjustments, and feel free to comment, feel free to ask questions, but you know, this is not. Pardon me? Oh, we're not even going near there, but we're getting a bird's eye view of what it's going to look like, and giving council an opportunity to start thinking about some of the things that they like or some of the things that they don't like about the 2017 to 2020 budget. So, Mrs. Lovegrove, if you would, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. The budget adjustments for the 2017 to 2020 years are under operating a grant of revenue from the Western Diversification Grants of $69,225, and that is to offset the cost of the renovations at the PCCC. That includes roof repair, painting, exterior walls, etc. On the expenditure side, we have an increase in bylaw position by 0.4 FTE. Now you'll also see a 0.6 on the next page. Basically, we're adding one additional position so that we will have a contingent of 3 bylaw officers and 1 emergency program coordinator. It's just the positions are split to add into the position structure that we have currently. Then we have miscellaneous labor consultations of $15,000 for each year going forward. And we would like to add the RCMP 17th officer in 2017.
Okay, Councillor Weir has a question.
Thank you. I always get confused with this 0.4 and 0.6. So as of next year, we're going to have 3 bylaw enforcing officers and a full-time. What? Well,
In
2000.
2016, we will have 2 regular full-time and 1.6 bylaw officers.
Yeah.
So we will have 2.6 in 2016. So what we are asking for, and because that bylaw position is split 0.4 as an emergency program coordinator, what we are asking for 2016 is for council to increase that 0.4 emergency program coordinator to a full-time emergency program coordinator. So then we would have 3 full-time bylaw officers and 1 full-time emergency program coordinator.
Okay, I understand. Thanks.
So on the spending packages for future years, in 2017, there's a request for an IT summer student, an emergency program coordinator, 0.6, which we've just gone over, a fire department assistant, an anniversary celebration for the fire department's 75th anniversary, a paid call system for the fire department, and a Parks and Trails master plan. In 2018,
Councillor Greer?
Thank you. The fire department assistant, is that a new position?
that's correct.
So how many full-time firemen do we have now?
That would make 4.6 full-time paid fire department employees.
4.6?
Yes.
Where's the other 0.4?
We don't have another 0.4.
So that is one more added fireman, full-time.
I will pass it off to Chief Banks.
Chief Banks?
Could you explain that to me, please?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Greer, currently, right now, we have 3 full-time staff and a 0.5 office assistant for clerical resources. We are the fire department assistant. It was one that was included in the budget in 2010 and was approved, and when council did the hiring freeze, it was removed from the budget. So this will bring us, this position would bring us up to 4 career staff, if you will, in the department, plus the office assistant.
Thank you.
Continue.
Thank you, Your Worship. In 2018, we have requests for an HR advisor and an engineering technician. And in 2020, we have the demolition of the Shelley Road building. So those are the operating spending packages. The capital spending packages, in 2017, we have a request for the community park playground resurfacing, the water park cistern in community park, and a bulk fuel storage and backup generator at Public Works Yard. In 2018, there's a request for the community park mobility challenge access ramp, an expansion of the community park Arbutus Point Plaza area, pickleball courts, and a playing field cistern at Springwood Park. In 2019, there's a request for the Community Park Plaza, which is basically the area for the Sandcastle expansion, and District 69 track and field project facility. In 2020, we have a request for Community Park clubhouse and washrooms. This is new in addition to what we already have. And in 2024, an all-weather playing field. And again, we have this in the budget as $2 million. We also have a contingent $1 million grant in the budget to offset this, as we at senior staff level have determined that without grants, this project would not go forward.
So go ahead, Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Worship. Just like to know the size of the 3 cisterns, the 280,000 we're spending this year. The size of that, I know you said it at the last meeting, and I've forgotten what size that was.
Through your worship, the size approximately that we're estimating right now for the Springwood Park cistern is equivalent to the one at the community park, is 125,000 liters per day during peak summer demands. So the actual size would be required to hold that. That's what the cost is based on, to hold 125,000 liters of water per day.
And the one at the play park? I think it's smaller, isn't it?
Approximately half that size, 60,000 liters.
Thank you.
Mr. Salter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this all-weather playing field here for $2 million, and you mentioned that there was a $1 million grant. So is the total cost $3 million, or is the total cost $1 million? So why is there $2 million there if it's a $1 million cost to the city?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Salter, in the budget, we always disclose the full cost of the project, and then we also show any revenues that would offset. And so you just basically have to put the two together. But the grant is just a contingent grant right now. It is not guaranteed.
Yes, follow up.
Can someone explain this to me? What is this? Is this like a covered field for people to go have their sports in, or what is it?
Yes, through your worship, an all-weather playing surface is essentially artificial turf. So it's very much like other communities like Ladysmith and Nanaimo have. You can use them year-round without damaging the actual turf. So they can be used in all weather conditions. And it's synthetic grass. Most of the playing surfaces now on higher level sports are synthetic turf. And that would be the cost to actually build one of these structures. And what it does is provide a budget, identified budget, if the council chooses to approve it, that we could go forward and seek grant opportunities with.
Follow up?
Where would it be?
Through your worship, there's numerous locations that we could look at. One of them is one of the old landfill site down in the industrial park would lend itself to the artificial playing turf. We could also look at potentially some existing school district properties that if they wanted to partner up with the city. There's two in the city that would be identified. So altogether, there's several properties that we could look at.
Councillor Patterson.
I think my question was answered. This isn't being looked at in the downtown, in the park, downtown park area for the fields. No, it would be a new location, and it hasn't been identified what that could be, whether it's soccer, whether it's baseball, track and field, any of that. It could be anything. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. It'd be multi-use, so there'd be it could be any sport could be played on it.
Just to follow up, Your Worship. So if it's on a school playing field, that could be a joint project?
Yes, if the school district certainly wanted a partnership with the city and...
Or same with the RDN?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, I'm on the Recreation Board, and we've spent hours probably talking about this, but I think they're having a hard time deciding whether they want to just have a field, whether they want to add a track, or whether they want a whole sports complex. And of course, if you're looking at a whole sports complex with arena, a curling rink, and everything else, I'm telling them it's impossible. So my suggestion was to go with the track first and then do a field. And I think the soccer players have $200,000 put aside for an artificial turf. So I think this debate will go on. It has gone on for 10 years, and from the way we're discussing it, I think it might be another 5 or 10 years. Thanks.
All I can tell you from my experience with my grandkids on artificial turf is that the cleaning of the artificial turf is a whole new experience. You know, the officials that installed it tell me that, you know, you get blood and broken teeth and something else on artificial turf, and it doesn't disappear like it does in a regular field. You have to clean these things up, and there's a giant vacuum cleaner that, anyway, it's going to be interesting if we ever get to that, to how these fields have to be cleaned. They don't absorb. They leave everything on the field. So just try to picture that sometimes when you've got nothing better to do. Continue, Mrs. Lovegrove.
Thank you, Your Worship. So this is just a summarized version of the 20-year capital plan. It does include all those items that we have just gone over from the 2017 to the 2024 year. So those items are included in this plan. If any of those items are not approved, this plan would change.
Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Your Worship. And so the financial information that was sent out to council, it's, as again, if it's got the Jensen extension on there, and I don't remember having a discussion regarding the Jensen extension or moving it up, and this is a piece of a transportation plan that had never been approved. It didn't even make it past the first public hearing, and so I'm curious as to how that ended up there.
I think the context of that was that we briefly discussed the issue of going through the Jensen extension. The discussion I remember that we would have is that would come up at the time when staff present the core field upgrades, because there was a possibility that with the core field upgrades that were going to be made, the consideration of the Jensen extension would be brought back at that time to look at the potential cost saving that might have by doing the two at the same time. Am I correct in that, Mr. Figuera? Ms. Gomez, I believe that's where the discussion ended, and it won't come back until the core field extension, or until the core field renewal and replacement program comes back to the council for consideration and approval.
If I may, Your Worship, I think it's important that we just confirm in the budget. I know some design money was brought forward. And I believe some design money was brought forward, but I don't know if the Jensen extension construction money was, I believe it's still in 2018. So it might be useful for us just to confirm that before I comment. Right, so there's 2018, that's the full amount. I think, can we confirm if the design of that was brought forward? So it appears as though there was a core field discussion, and the money, the full money, including design and construction, was left in 2018 at the moment. That's where it appears right now. I recollect that there was discussion about the Jensen extension, and there was some discussion about bringing it forward, but I don't think we had decided at any point to move it yet from 2018. There was some discussion of possibly bringing forward the design of Jensen extensions to have it designed along with Craig Street to determine what that might look like. There's certainly some cost benefit to doing that. We'd have to we'd have to design the intersection of Jensen and Corfield anyways, assuming that, and make certain assumptions. So there would be some cost savings there. But at the moment, in terms of Jensen Extension, it looks like the full amount is still in 2018.
Councillor Powell.
I'm sorry, I need to contradict you. We were given this statement via email, and it's got the Jensen Extension, $500,000 in 2016. In 2017, it's got the remainder that was in 2018. As far as I can remember, I don't believe that the Jensen Extension has been formally approved by council. It never passed the public hearing stage. And so what I'm curious about is how did that, I guess Councillor Greer brought it up either at the last meeting, he wanted that to be moved forward, but I think we've missed a lot of steps in the process. It hasn't been approved by council to move forward. I still have a lot of questions about the Jensen Extension. I don't know if it's needed, given what's happening. If you want to slow traffic on the highway, make it a pedestrian-friendly highway where you hit the light and it stops traffic. There's all different ways to do it, and so I know this isn't about you, Mr. Figuera. This is about how it ended up in there, and because it hasn't been approved by council. And so that is in the budget, because I've asked Mrs. Lovegrove before the meeting started, and it is in the budget. And so I would like to know where it is in the budget so we can take it out of the budget.
Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Your Worship. I did bring it up probably a month or so ago, and our previous CAO and I had discussed it to great length. He felt that it should go through, it be brought forward, and he also felt that when we do the Corfield that we should do the design work in 2016 and put the actual Jensen Extension off until 2017. But I think it was discussed, but I'm not so sure whether we ever approved anything.
Mrs. Coleman.
No, Your Worship, the council has not approved the Jensen Avenue extension. But the monies are here for whether or not council would like to discuss it at this time, or whether you want to approve it for the 2016 for design work and then construction in 2017. Council, we're looking for some direction from council staff. We're looking for some direction from council with respect to the ongoing discussions about the disposition of 183 McVickers, because the Jensen Avenue extension will definitely impact that property.
My recollection of the discussion following what Councillor Greer said was that with the former CAO is that it would be worthwhile looking in context with the Corfield upgrades and looking at the Jensen extension at that time to see if there could be some cost savings. So I think that maybe that's the reason why that's in the budget. Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. With all due respect, I don't think it's the CAO who should be giving direction. As well, I think that I would like to make a motion that those numbers return to the year 2018, and that we use the money that we would have put in the budget for $200,000 and $500,000, pardon me, for the Jensen extension to be put towards the Wells Street temporary upgrade.
Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Beal. Discussion. Yes, Mrs. Lovegrove.
Your Worship, if I may, excuse me, the monies have been returned to 2018. That was my error. I did not remove it from the adjustments. We started off in 2018. There was discussion to move it to design cost to 2016 and the construction to 2017. Then there was further discussion to move it back again. It's moved back into the budget into 2018, but the adjustment sheet was not adjusted. So I apologize for that error.
No.
Everything's good. Yes.
So you?
No.
So
it's all right there in the 2018.
Are you going to withdraw your motion?
I'll withdraw my.
Thank you. Okay. All right, continue, and let's remember, we're talking 2017 to 2020. So.
Thank you, Your Worship. Okay, so that's the capital plan with the Jensen extension in 2018. So again, this is the general revenue fund, what the actual overall financial plan would look like for the operating side for the next 5 years. And again, this is in assuming that all the items from 2017 to 2020 are approved and are included in these amounts. Then on the non-operating side is the capital expenditures and the final bottom line of a balanced budget. So taking into consideration all the items we have looked at tonight, the approved ones and the non-approved ones, the non-approved, there was only one non-approved and that was not already in. The other two items that were to be considered are not in these numbers, but they would have a minimal impact on these numbers. But everything else is there, and this is our projected accumulated surplus from 2016 to 2020.
So we're looking at the low amounts in 2020 and in 2024. There need to be some really serious budget discussions prior to those years. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So that's it for the general fund. We would be moving on to the water fund next. Was there any further discussion on the general fund before we move?
Questions, Councillor Oates, Councillor Beal, Councillor Saul.
Can someone give me a broad brushstrokes explanation of why our surpluses dropped from like $6 million next year to down to less than $2 million in 2018, 2019?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Oates, at the beginning of the process, we did bring it to Council's attention that between 2016 and 2034, there is over $10 million worth of new capital projects in the budget. And basically, the low spots are the years where we have a higher amount of capital projects being undertaken.
As I recall, the costing that we talked about at one point in time during the meeting, the recosting of the 20-year program is up by $10 million? Yeah, okay. Councillor Salter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'm just wondering if we can look at, we've got in 2018 a community park plaza, kiosk plaza, Arbutus Point, and we've also got in 2019 a community park plaza for the sandcastles. And I'm wondering why we couldn't just have one plaza in the park rather than two plazas, you know, at $550,000 because we're having two of them. Wouldn't one plaza do the job?
Mr. Squire, have you got the answer to that? Get your big black books.
Yes, through your worship. These are things that we can certainly look at in the update to the Master Community Park Plan. Those are things that have been identified by community groups. Currently, right now, our community park is saturated in the summertime with user groups requesting it. Essentially, we're kind of running out of facilities and venues and room in some aspects to host all the requests that we're getting. This was the first year we've actually denied some of the users because it's essentially the park is booked. Again, it's something that we could certainly look at once it's identified in the budget, but we can certainly look at with the update to the Master Community Park Plan.
We'll be doing that in 2016.
Next year. Yeah.
Right. We voted that study to be done. Okay.
Thank you, Your Worship. Okay, on to the water fund. Again, this is just a review of what we went over in October at the October meeting. So the building blocks is the Plan B of the ERWS treatment project. We have $4.4 million included in grants and long-term borrowing of $5.6 million. Our increases in the water for 2016 to 2017 would be 2.5% and then 2% from 2018 to 2020. We have one spending package for the water fund, and that's in 2016, and that's water line to service the new public works shop and the buildings that are going out there, and that's for $95,000. Capital expenditures, a summary of the water fund capital expenditures, $54 million over the 20 years. And a look at the water fund financial plan. Again, the surplus, the deficits in the middle of the plan from the operating, and then the non-operating costs for a balanced budget at the bottom, to and from the surpluses. And the surpluses for the water fund start out at $6.8 million and come down to $5.8 million after the 10 years.
They consistently stay over. They go from 6 million 8, but they consistently stay over 5 million for the remainder of the.
Correct.
Up until 2025. So that's good news.
So again, that's it for the water fund. So moving on to the sewer fund. Sewer fund, the building blocks is based on a 5% rate increase throughout the full plan. The spending packages for the water fund are lift station upgrades to both Martindale and Craig Bay lift stations, and a sewer servicing line to go along with the water servicing line at the Public Works yard, for a total of $150,000 for all three. The 20-year capital plan for the sewer is $5.8 million over 20 years. The financial plan for the sewer fund, again, the surplus and deficits all the way along, and then balancing it off from their unrestricted surplus for a balanced budget. The unrestricted surplus for the sewer, the projected, starts off at $2.1 million and basically ends up at $500,000 with a big blip in 2023 where it dips down to $52,000.
So again, after 2020, the surpluses in terms of will require some strict attention.
Correct.
on the budget and the taxation levels.
Yep.
To deal with that.
Or the rates.
And the key years for the RDN, that's coming up when, in 2020? I forget now. Is it? You don't know?
I'm not sure.
We haven't been told by the RDN yet of our final cost, have we, Mr. Butterworth? No, because there's going to be a major upgrade of the French Creek system, and we're going to contribute to that as members of the regional district of Nanaimo. Okay. Before I go to the members of the audience, council, any questions, any comments on this, or we'll enshrine that in our books for future discussion coming up sometime later on in 2016. Okay, members of the audience, thank you very, very much for your patience and for waiting. I'm going to ask those of you who have questions and comments to come to the microphone. Give us your name, your address, please, and shoot. Mr. Reitzman, Mr. Pastors, and then Mr. Burden, I believe. Okay.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members, the staff, and season's greetings to you, by the way. I've got a couple of observations and questions, if I may. Is there an anticipated percentage increase for taxes for next year based on the 2016 budget? Now, I've not been at any of the budget meetings. We have choir on Monday nights.
I just want to remind you that a 4.5% tax increase for 2017, if you're a homeowner and your home is assessed at about $279,000, the increase is about $55 a year. If your home is valued at $400,000, your increase is about $77 a year in taxes.
For 16 or 17?
For 16.
16, okay. Yeah, like I mentioned, we have choir on Monday night, so I'm unable to come. And incidentally, we had 400 people out to our two concerts. We're really happy with that. Secondly, last year, the permissive tax exemption for the curling club, did the city actually send a check to the curling club for $3,000? There was a motion passed that the city would pay the $3,000 to the curling club.
I don't think we did.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll have to look into that. We did pay their tax bill, or I think we must have sent them a check, but I'll have to check into that and I'll get back to council. Because there was a motion that we would pay their taxes up to a certain value. I think it was 2,600, not 3,000. It was ended up being under 3,000. 2,600 rings a bell.
Had they paid the full amount that was due, or did they get to that point?
I'll have to look into it. I can't recall.
I of course tend to be corrected, but I thought the amount was $3,000, and I wonder if the city sent the money to the curling club in order for them to pay the city back, which of course meant that approximately half went to the provincial government. What would have been better, I suppose, if the curling club would have paid the taxes and then the city reimbursed the curling club for the city portion of those taxes collected. I just wonder what's happening for next year. Do they have a fully permissive tax exemption? They do.
Yes,
okay,
they do.
good. That's okay. The other point, are there any long-term or short-term or long-term steps towards that property across from the fire hall, which could be potentially enormous tax benefits to the city? You know, I appreciate if things are in camera that you cannot talk about, and that's fair enough. But
that's exactly the case. We've discussed it in camera, and we'll continue to discuss it in camera.
That's fair enough. Yeah, it's
in
just
terms
that
of the highest and best use of that property.
Yeah. I went through the last year through the 2014 audited financial statements, and in fact I went through the other 6 or 7 just at a particular item, number 6, and that is the payout of accrued sick day benefits. And I noticed for the first time in 2014 the payout of accrued sick benefits. It's item number 6 in the consolidated statements audited. And I noticed that the auditors for the first time in 2014, and not from 2002 till 2013, mentioned 100% maximum payout to 60 days for union members and up to 50% for non-union members if certain restrictions are met. What are those restrictions? It's in the 2014 audited financial statements. It said non-union staff up to 50%, up to 261 days, if certain restrictions are met. I wonder what those restrictions are. If you don't have them at the moment, just let me know in due course.
Anybody know what they are, Mrs. Comas?
What I can think of that would be the terms of the employment contracts for the non-union employees. Every non-union employee has an employment contract, and for the majority of them, not all of them have that clause in their contract, so not everyone gets that payout.
So there would be a restriction in the clause?
In the employment contract.
Okay.
Mr. Butterworth?
Thank you, Your Worship. One other thing I can shed some light on is that you also must be retiring and moving on to the municipal pension plan. So you can't just quit and get the payout. You have to be retiring. So.
Fair enough. I'm just trying to find out what those certain restrictions are, and it's not in there for reasons, I suppose, and you're able to explain it. That's fine. And last but not least, in February, March, when I addressed council a couple of times, I gave them the comparisons of the 4 jurisdictions in terms of non-union and union payout of accrued 6 days. The anomaly in Parksville, of course, is well known, 261 days at 50%. Now, I asked at the time, and you agreed to that, to perhaps have a policy discussion about that. Now, and again, I'm not going into in camera what happens there, but I just wonder if you've had discussions, has that resulted in 2 policy changes?
My recollection is we had discussions in camera. And
Yes, Your Worship. We've had policy discussions with respect to benefits for non-union employees. Obviously, the union employee benefits are governed by the collective agreement, which is where that contingency for the payout of sick time is included in the collective agreement. But for non-union employees, as I said, not all non-union employees have that payout of sick time in their contract. So it is a contractual matter between the employer and the employee.
The reason I ask again, as I mentioned earlier this year, when CAO Mark Brown, Qualicum Beach, retired, he had 120 days of accrued sick day benefits got paid out, and that resulted in the financial officer, John Marsh, who used to work here, to make a proposal adopted by council to limit it to 60 days. And that's what I've been after. I'm not interested in what you talked about. I'm just interested if there have been, as a result of discussions, policy changes, or is the 261 days still in effect? Up to?
I can't speak for what the town of Qualicum Beach does, but the 261 days in Parksville are still in effect.
So that's still in, all right.
And we did have that discussion.
Yeah, and of course it's a gross anomaly. Last but not least...
Just Paul, for a minute, can you step back a little further from the mic? We're getting a little feedback.
You got a feedback? Okay, sorry about that. Last but not least, and it's financial consequences and it's taxpayers' monies. In line of what happened in Qualicum Beach in terms of payout for the CAO. Our CAO just retired, wonderful, wonderful person, but what was the benefit in terms of accrued sick days paid out? Was that part of the retirement package? And if so, how many days? And again, it is, it's taxpayers' money. It's part of a salary. Benefits.
I don't have that figure here, Your Worship, but we report the remuneration to all exempt employees annually as required by law in the SOFI reports, so that information will be available in the report.
So the amount of payout of accrued sick days to the former CEO will be made public at the appropriate time?
The entire remuneration package for every employee is reported every year under the Statement of Financial Investments, is that what it is? SOFI report? I can never remember what. Statement of Financial Information, thank you. That information is made public every year in that report when it's filed, I believe, in June of each year. And that information for Mr. Manson will also be included in the SOFI report.
Would that specify, Mr. Mayor, through you to, would it specify days paid out?
We do not break it down. We provide the total of remuneration paid to each employee. So it's not broken down between what's paid for sick time, vacation time, or any other kind of...
If there is a request to have it broken down, will that request be honored?
It would... I mean, we don't normally get into those kinds of specifics. There is a contractual relationship between the employee and the employer, and we are required by law to report the amount of remuneration paid to each employee. So that is what we pay. We pay we report what we are required by law to report.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I suppose different jurisdictions have different policies and ways of doing it, but it became pretty obvious in the town of Qualicum Beach that paying out 120 days versus the union 60 days in union for all the 4 jurisdictions was unacceptable enough that they changed the policy to only 60 days. And I submit to you, as I did in February and March of this year, that up to 261 days, 50% of that, 130 days, is 26 weeks or 5 days a week, is excessive. And I would like to know, as a taxpayer, to what extent the CAO was provided with the payout of accrued sick days. Is it 130 days? Is it 100 days? And I'll leave it with you, but I will bring it up again.
What I can tell you that we did discuss when we were in camera with regards to the whole issue of remuneration is that we I think there was an overall look at workload, people that don't get paid overtime and all of those things in terms of number of hours worked, numbers of meetings to attend during the year. And, we certainly didn't want to be punitive, but we'll have a look at that.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, but I submit to you, as I did with my research, that the same arguments were used by the other three jurisdictions, but the maximum is 60 days to non-union employees as it is to unions, and they have the same arguments. That's fair enough. I find it very excessive here in Parksville, even though that 50% of the 261 days, as per the notes of the auditor, you can only claim a maximum of 50%. But anyhow, I will revisit it at the appropriate time. Thank you for that, and I wish you the best of the season.
Mr. Pastors, you're next. I forget your address. Just give me your address.
Lodgepole Drive. I'm the other Al. I just have I guess a question. Is there ever a time during this budget process, and like not in the next 5 weeks, 6 weeks, or like in the whole process, that we would see the budget broken out as salaries, operating, capital? That is, you would have the number of FTEs and the salaries, including benefits and whatnot, but you don't have to break that out, and then have an operating budget without the salaries being buried within that operating budget. Because when I've been looking at the sheets that have been passed out at various times, it's really strange. You've got an emergency program coordinator, and then you've got an assistant for the fire department, and then you've got an anniversary celebration, and then you've got a Parks and Trails master plan cost. That's all on like one sheet put together, where you've got salaries buried within an operating. And I'm saying, is there ever a time that they're separated out?
Mr. Butterworth, I believe we can do that, can we not?
I know you can do it, but I'm saying, is there ever a time that we actually look at, this is the number of FTEs we have in 2016 budgeted, and this is what the salaries are, and then this is what the operating is, this is what the capital is, and then compare it to the previous year. That way it jumps out at you where the dollars are really going and how much of that is tied up in new FTEs and new salaries.
Mr. Butterworth.
Well, our whole reporting model is built on reporting different areas of the city, such as community park, roads, snow removal, and the salaries are built into each function that we do. We don't build our budget anywhere where we track the salaries separately. We can print out a report that pulls out all the salaries for all the departments and add them together, export them into Excel, and come up with a report. But our reporting model isn't built that way. The only time we report that is on our year-end when we do our financial statements. There is in our notes to financial statements, it does break down our costs by labor. It's not just salaries, there's other things in the labor, costs and consulting and materials and other supplies. So that's broken down in our financial statements at the end of the year, but we don't do our budgeting that way at all.
Can it not be done? I don't think I'm asking for the world to, because I did send in a request saying what is our current FTEs and what is our current salary. So I've got that figure for 2015. That's the budgeted number. Somebody was kind enough to send me that by email when I asked for it. So I'm saying, can we not go one step further and get that for 2016?
We can do that, yes. As I said, our model is not built that way, and it's an effort on staff to do it, but it can be done, yes.
It's not a lot of effort. Thank you.
Mr. Burton, please. Would you please come to the microphone?
.479 Westhurst. And something a little different. I'd like to talk to you about a concept that has been near and dear to the Chamber and my heart for some time. And it's interesting that the Paris Climate Conference has wrapped up, and there is an agreement in place. And while the budget topic I'd like to present to you this evening is relative to that, it's something that we've been paying attention to for several years. Trying to think when it ended. 4 years ago, we hired a business energy advisor, and his role was to provide assistance to businesses in the north end of the island on how to reduce their energy footprint. And tonight I'd like to present to you a concept of establishing a community power group with the appropriate resources. We're not in the first wave of communities to look to renewable energy sources as a way to demonstrate environmentally responsible behavior, and we aren't burning coal or diesel either, unless we have some kind of a catastrophic event, we have to fire up the generators, then we'll be burning diesel. Our electricity is clean hydropower like the bulk of British Columbia. So why should we be following communities like Kimberley, Salt Spring Island, and Nelson, to name a few, who are investing in solar panels, and why should a business organization like the Chamber of Commerce care? The answer to the second question is simple. We want the city to be able to provide a maximum amount of service to residents and businesses without heavy taxation. A strong business community relies on the addition of new businesses, providing both new and competing services and products. And in order to attract those businesses, we need local government to provide the best services possible while keeping fees and taxes at a competitive rate. This in part answers the question of why other communities are exploring renewable community power options. In addition, a demonstration of leadership in the tech and renewable power sectors is a good way to say to young entrepreneurs that we are a progressive, environmentally sensitive community, and we would like you to locate your family and your business here. Goes along with the lower the average age and raise the average wage mantra that I've been pumping out there for as long as we've been working on this. There is an ad hoc group of people in the region currently meeting to discuss the concepts and possible policies around the development of community power group in Parksville. And as a proponent of solar power, the Chamber has been participating in those discussions. The city currently receives $300,000 from the various utility companies, including $110,000 from BC Hydro in lieu of taxes. It's 1%, I believe, of each utility bill in the city goes into this fund. My purpose in coming to present this evening is to ask you to include in your budget discussions the allocation of resources to explore the development of solar power in Parksville. We would like to see a portion of the $300,000, preferably half, earmarked for the development of renewable energy, and we would like to see a city staff member have responsibility for the development of community power included in their job description. We are a progressive community in an idyllic setting, and in order to remain progressive in the minds of those wishing to come and establish businesses and families here, we must continue to move forward. Steps like the recent research into aquifer recharge and the establishment of public electric vehicle recharging stations have demonstrated positive leadership by the city, and we would like to encourage you to take a further leadership step and commit to the establishment of a recognized community power group with the appropriate resources. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a first. And Council, any reaction to that request? Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Worship. I had a brief conversation a couple months ago with a new company that was looking at solar panel work and everything. And with the Parksville Community Conference Center and having to have roof work and everything done, have we even considered putting solar panels and that in place, as that's a city-owned property?
Yes, we have, and at the present time, staff can correct me if I'm wrong, but I gather that the payback period, or the what do you call it, the return on investment, is still a little ways off. We're getting there, but it's a little ways off as of now. It's been looked at. I mean, the kind of thing that I had talked to staff about offline was the PCCC, the PCTC, and the fire hall. But you know, it's a challenge.
Just to follow up.
Follow up.
That technology is constantly changing.
Prices of solar is going down. Yeah.
And it maybe should be revisited.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Powell and then Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you very much for your motion or your presentation. Anyways, through you to the Director of Finance, where does that money go now that's for the utilities in BC Hydro? Does it just go into general revenue, or do we have it earmarked for anything?
Currently, in the past, we've got 1% from BC Hydro, the cable companies, Fortis, and the fourth one is TELUS, I think. And I think it's around $200,000 a year we get, and it just goes into general revenues. Now, there is a new revenue, and that might have been, I'm not sure if that was the one you were talking about, but from the gas companies now, there's a surcharge on their bills for all of Parksville, and we're getting that, and I can't remember the amount we're getting now. It's over $100,000, I think, but I can't remember the exact amount.
176 seems to ring a bell.
And that's a new revenue that we're just starting to get the tail end of this year and next year. And at this point, that's just going into general revenues until we're directed otherwise.
And so we see that, follow-up, sorry. So we see that just as extra right now that we could look at to support this?
Yeah, and I believe, Ms. Lovegrove would have to correct me, I believe I've already put amount into the budget for that revenue, so it's already included in the numbers and the surpluses you're seeing there, so it's not a new revenue that's not in there right now.
Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Worship. I'm assuming that those revenues we've spent and it's already spent in the budget.
Well, it's not spent yet, but
no.
Yeah, it's in.
But it's in the budget. It's in the budget.
It's in the budget numbers that you were looking
down
at
the road,
yes,
yes.
and the accumulated surpluses that you were looking at, yes.
Just one question to Kim. I think your suggestions are good. Don't you think in the near future that solar panels will be like a fraction of the size and therefore making them much cheaper? Like, we're just getting into this, and my feeling is we're a few years away from really making a difference when it comes to solar.
Yeah, the technology continues to develop, and the prices continue to go down. We put solar panels on the roof of the visitor center 2 years ago as a commitment, as a statement more than as a revenue source, although we do get a slight reduction in our we're connected back into the BC Hydro grid, and we get a rebate on our own electrical use out of that. I'm talking more about there is a revenue stream there, but you're right, the return on investment isn't quite acceptable yet. I think we calculated ours at about 7 years, but that's because we've got a dual purpose panel that also heats the coolant going to our heat pump, so we've got some offsetting benefit from not spending as much on heating costs. It's more a statement about who we are as a community, and it's more of I'm asking the city to take a leadership position in addition to I'm going to make the same presentation to the school district. I think the school district needs to take a leadership, and maybe there's some partnership opportunities there. I think it's the right thing to do, and I think it's the right time to do it.
Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. I agree with you. I think it's time for us to put our money where our mouth is. It was me that brought up the PCCC and the new roof and ring it out for the panels, and of course it was one. Right now it's too expensive, but it's time. Maybe we should put a windmill down in the community park. That'll really get things going. But I believe we need to do something, and I think it's a good idea, and I think the city should lead it. We've done a lot of things in this community to be leaders in, so I think it's a good idea.
What I find amazing is that hydro rates are going up all the time. They're going up and up and up and up, and I think they're going up for a total of, 26% over the next few years, or a grand total of where they started back in 2014. So I think that the day is coming in BC where we're not going to be able to brag that we've got the cheapest hydropower anywhere. I don't think that's going to be the case, and they're building, it looks as if we're going to go ahead and build Site C, which is, what, $8 to $10 billion? So we're all going to pay for that. I think that if council wants to have this discussion, where I think we want to consider going is to start putting some money aside now from that fund, so that in the next year or 2 or 3 we can begin to look at something that we could do that's tangible, whether it's a solar farm or whatever ideas crop up. But I've been looking at a lot of things over the years in terms of, now solar farms seem to be the more popular issues that are going on. So on that note, Councillor Salter.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I just have a question to you, Kim. Are you using batteries as well? So are you loading down into batteries and then putting that back out onto the grid?
No, storage is a completely different issue, okay? Storage is the biggest hindrance towards solar power right now. But if you feed back into the grid, then your storage is BC Hydro's dams. And that resolves that for now. Battery development is coming along as well, and that technology is improving, but I'm not suggesting that we get into the storage business.
So are you feeding back onto the grid now?
We are.
And so what do you think the savings is?
Oh, I bet I haven't looked at it for the year. Our bill has been reduced by probably about $20 a month on hydro, and the heating bill is something else.
Councillor Oates?
$20 a month times, so keep for a reduction for next year.
We have eight panels on the roof. It's not a big project.
I'm intrigued by the idea, given where we live and all that, and I think that there might be a potential here. But I think what we're really talking about is finding a way to fund it. So the money, even if we're getting money from whoever we're getting it from currently, BC Hydro or Fortis or whoever, it's not simply a matter of just redirecting that money. What we're talking about is, what we should probably do if we're serious about this is we should say our tax increase is going to be X, and of that, this portion is going to be dedicated to this project. That's the way I think we should do it, as opposed to, because all we're doing is just pushing it further down. Yeah, good idea, good idea, good idea. When the time comes to put your hand up to approve the tax increase, oh, that's too much.
It's 1%.
Yeah.
Mr. Butterworth, you said something about the latest amount of money we're getting. We're getting another donation. Is it Fortis? And you said, I thought I heard you say that it wasn't included in this year's revenue, or in the next year's revenue for 2016.
No, it is included, and yes, it's a new revenue source we're getting from Fortis, and it is included in the numbers that we reported to you.
Would it be, if council could agree on an amount, would it be timely to take that out and start putting that aside, or mentioning, as Councillor Oates has mentioned, that the tax increase is this, and part of that portion of that money is going to. Before you answer the question, I better get the CAO to answer that question.
Well, Your Worship, what I'm going to say is, this is the provision of a new municipal service. This is not something we have done before. And so we have to look at what the source of revenue would be, what the allocation of staff time would be, and given the way our staff are stretched, rather than amend somebody's job description, because frankly I don't know whose job description we'd amend, and look at what the staffing requirements would be to provide that service. And if council would like us to move forward in that direction, then we would like the opportunity to work it into our 5-year financial plan to see what the impact would be on taxes and what the impact would be in terms of how we would go about where we would put solar panels, where would be the best use of the energy source. There are all sorts of factors that I think that we would have to examine before we could move forward finally. But I don't know that it would be possible for us to do that for 2016, but certainly if we worked it somewhere into our 5-year plan to see where it came out in terms of our
I think I feel a motion coming on. I think. Do I hear a motion coming on?
Thank you, Worship. And so I think that I would like to see staff put together a report and an analysis of what exactly it would take for the staff time. I think it would be a good idea to look at the different places we get money to cut GSG emissions. So that would be the gas tax, speeding tickets, like that could be a source of revenue to counter. Oh, she's going to tell me I can't.
No, Your Worship, I'm not going to tell her you can't. I'm just saying that we have those sources of revenues already, and they are going into general revenue, and we use those to cover off our operating expenses in conjunction with the tax revenues that we raise on an annual basis. So whether or not we redirect funding from within our current budget, I think that at some point in time we are going to have to go to the taxpayer to make that up. So as Councillor Oates was saying, regardless of where the money comes from, eventually it's the taxpayers that are going to be asked to make up that difference.
Take the funding source out of there and just put the report from staff. Thanks.
Motion. Do I have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Greer. Discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Thank you. That is carried. The other thing that I guess I should have made the comment before we took the vote, but I think the industry, there's officials within the renewable energy industry that are fairly well advanced from some of the reports that I've been reading in terms of where you could go with this, and I'm not so sure that anyway, staff will give us a report, but I'm not so sure that we necessarily need to have a staff person to do that kind of work. Anyway, we can discuss that in due time, but because there's a lot of industries and a lot of people that are doing things that are amazing in the business, and they're not necessarily close to Parksville, but they're all over the place. Yeah. Okay. Councillor Salter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's just a comment, but I know that our Prime Minister has pledged several $1 million from the Paris conference at any rate for sustainability and all of that entire concept. So it may be possible that we're a little bit early. There may be dollars coming to provinces or municipalities at any rate that we could utilize rather than trying to pull it out of the taxpayers. Well, it all comes to the taxpayer, but from the municipality, it could be coming from the feds. Just a comment.
That's a very good point. Plus, we're going to legalize marijuana, and there's going to be all kinds of revenue from the legalization of marijuana for municipalities and provinces, and that's where we'll get our money, from the legalization of marijuana.
If I could just thank you
for
your interest, and thank you for taking a step. I think we accomplished something. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Moving on, Council, we have some bylaws to adopt this evening, and I'm sorry.
Logistically, with respect to the budget, I know we're going to have final budget discussions again sometimes in February, but don't we have to pass some sort of provisional budget to get us operating until then?
Why didn't anybody else bring that up? Okay. Who's going to answer that question, Mrs. Comas or Mr. Butterworth?
I'll take it then. Yeah, what we would like to see is ideally on our schedule was the council meetings in December would be giving readings to the budget. That was our ideal schedule. Now we fell a little behind that, but that's what we wanted to do, and have the provisional budget passed before the end of the year, because we can't start spending the money on the new items in the budget that council has approved until we have a provisional budget approved. We can spend money that's in the 2015 to 2019 budget, but when we have a new employee, such as a new bylaw officer or the other ones, we cannot start hiring them until we have a budget approved. So if we wait till the final, it's probably not going to be approved till May, so that puts us quite a ways behind. So we like to have the provisional bylaw drawn up and approved by council. So I guess we would like to have a motion to prepare the bylaws, and then we'll bring them to the next council meeting.
Otherwise, we'd have to shut it down. Yeah. Just like the Congress in the United States. So you're making a motion that Staff would prepare a provisional budget for approval?
We approve the provisional budget.
We approve what we've done so far tonight. Everybody okay with that? Is that what I'm talking about?
Yes,
Mrs.
Your
Collins?
Worship. You're approving the 2016 to 2020 provisional financial plan and directing staff to prepare the necessary bylaws.
Okay, that's the motion moved by Councillor Greer. Anybody second? Councillor Beal. Any comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. Well, thank you for bringing that up. Okay. So, as I said a moment ago, we have bylaws to adopt tonight for final adoption. I'll read out the amendments, and I think we'll do them all together. Can I do that, Mrs. Comas? So the first bylaw is 2015 number 1492.2. The second bylaw is 2015 number 2000.101, and the third bylaw is 2015 number 219 number 1517.2. So do I have a mover and a seconder? Passes by the move by Councillor Powell, seconded by Councillor Beal. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. Okay. So, next item on the agenda. Let me read it first. Pursuant to Section 91K of the Community Charter, Council proceed to a closed meeting to consider an item relating to. Oh, I'm sorry. We have new business. It's not on my agenda. We have new business tonight. So, who's got new business before we go into camera? Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Worship. After seeing our beach last year without any activity on it, I think we should start right away to organize something so that we can have some activity on our beach. So I would recommend that staff do permit on kayaking, paddleboard, etc., and whatever we need to do to get that going at an early stage, so we can advertise and have some activity down on our beach for 2016. So I'd make that as a motion.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Oates. Any discussion on the motion? Councillor Oates.
I'm seconding what I'm thinking. I'm seconding. So I think what I thought I was seconding is a request for proposals for people to provide recreation services down on the beach during the summer months.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, good, great motion. Fully supported.
Staff has to come up with the preliminaries and what we have to do to get to that point. Thank you. I have one other.
Oh, wait a minute.
We
got discussion on the motion. Councillor Powell and Councillor Beal.
And so a question through you to the CAO. So we've had this happen in the past, and we had certain criteria. Are we talking about dealing with the criteria prior to the request for proposals? So that's not really clear in the motion.
Okay, the motion that Councillor Greer had originally requested was that staff prepare a report on on the location and requirements and request for proposal process for providing entertainment and recreational rentals, non-motorized, in the community park. And so I'm assuming that is what the intent of
That's
this motion
perfect.
is.
Okay.
That's exactly what you said, isn't it? Yeah, that's what I heard. Councillor Beal.
Thank you. I'm just wondering about how this fits with the review of the community park master plan, and also just how much commercial activity we want to have in our community park. But presumably some of this would be reflected in the report provided by staff?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Beal, the report isn't designed to address the same kinds of undertakings that the Parks Master Plan would review, because it would be done in a whole perspective from the entire park. This is along the lines of what we have done in past years from time to time, where we have had a rental operation down in the park. Some of the things that staff will bring forward for council to consider is whether or not you will allow additional signage in the park, whether or not you will allow someone to stay overnight in the park to keep their property secure. In the past, because of the way we've dealt with our bylaws, the proponent or the person who has the business wasn't able to leave things overnight in the park. We had to work out those kinds of details, and so we were hoping that through this process we would start early in the year, work out all of those issues and the criteria, and be able to go forward with an RFP that would clearly enunciate what it is council wanted to see in the park, and then seek an appropriate vendor to provide those services.
I think also, following up on Councillor Beal's comment or question, I think also it would help in terms of when the time comes and we're looking at the master plan as to what we would do. I know from my experience with Coffee with the Mayor, I've had a number of people come to me in the last month saying, we have a business and we'd like to do this, and we know there's a demand. So I think that we'd better have a look at it sooner than later. Okay, Councillor Beal.
Thank you. Is there a concern that something of this nature opens up the door to continued expansion of commercial activity in the park?
Mrs. Comas?
Well, the intent would be to provide a contract for this summer coming, for the summer of 2016. It would be entirely council's prerogative whether they wanted to continue with this or enhance commercial activity in the park. That's a question. Overall commercial activity in the park would be a question for the park's master plan, but this is just to provide a service for a limited period of time, and there isn't a requirement that we provide ongoing opportunities. We can do it on an annual basis as council sees fit.
Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think to follow up on Councillor Beal's comments, we allowed food trucks in the park, and there was signage when there wasn't to be any. There was more than 2 trucks. There was 3 trucks in the park. And so it's really easy to abuse whatever goes down in there. So I just want people to envision we go down to the park, and if we do allow signs, we're going to have other signs. And what is that going to look like going down into our community park? When do we stop the commercialization of the community park? Remember, it's a community park, not a commercial park, not a business park. The other part of it is, if you're going to do this, I would like you to consult with the PDBA, who the park is in that area, and we had conflict in the past because that didn't happen. So I would like them to be consulted throughout the process.
Any further comments? Seeing none, did I call the vote? All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. Anything else under new business? Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Worship. As everybody knows, we've talked about doing something for the homeless over the last 7 years that I've been on council, and we haven't come up with very much. And Councillor Oates says doing nothing is not an option. So I gave it some thought, and I talked to the mayor, and I've talked to Sue, Councillor Powell, and Leanne, and I thought a good idea would be, in fact, I'll make a motion that we donate the German Jiu-Jitsu Center property and building as is, and as is important, to the Oceanside Task Force for the Homeless. I realize that there's a number of obstacles that we have to pass, zoning for one, and engineering for where the extension of Jensen would go out eventually. So I thought, well, I better talk to the people involved in the homeless, and here again the mayor suggested that I talk to Sarah Poole, but I couldn't get a hold of her, so I talked to Renetta Sutherland to see if in fact they were even interested in that building in that area. And little did I know that they had been looking at it for some time, and she was ecstatic when I suggested that maybe if the motion went through, that there would be a possibility that they could take that over. they have enough money, or they will have enough money to do a renovation on it, complete renovation on it, or they will also. Pardon? Okay. Well. Okay. So sorry. So where was I now? Yeah, they have money, provincial money, either to do a complete renovation on it, or in fact tear it down and build a new building. She really likes the idea of that area, and she liked that location. So I think we should make some kind of a move to get on with that, even though there are some restrictions and so on that we have to eventually make. But it'll give them a plan to move ahead on their plans, and because it's not going to come very quickly, I'm sure. So our city will take some time to get the work done, and in return, they'll take some time to plan their strategy for the future. So that's it in a nutshell.
Just before I go to council, I have a practical question for staff. Is the German Jiu-Jitsu Club the same building that we've gone out to tender, or we've gone out for to either buy the building? Is that in process?
No.
Is that underway? Nothing has been done on that.
No.
But there was a decision that it would be, we try to sell it. Was that the decision made at the budget, because we didn't want to pay the money to tear it down? Okay.
I believe we had a couple of offers, but nothing was settled on it.
Okay. Okay. So formally that hasn't gone out. So Councillor Salter and then Councillor Oates.
So I support this motion. I know that they do have support from the BC Housing, and they would be likely be willing to assist them with dollars in order to upgrade that building and make it livable. I think it's in a really good location, and I think that as far as the social housing goes, if we were going to make a move and do something like that, then this would be a perfect property. I believe a perfect property. I know that they would like this, that they think this property would work for them, and that they could do the rentals if required. So I absolutely support this for part.
Councillor Oates, Councillor Patterson, and then Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is a pretty big decision to make with such little notice. We're talking about giving away a piece of property to some group without a plan. They haven't come to us and said, if you give us this, we will do this. So I can't support, without much more background information on this, to ask me to put my hand up in support of giving away a prime piece of downtown property in an effort to combat an issue for no other reason, just to want to combat the issue, and we all want to combat the issue. But to give away a piece of property without knowing what they're going to do with it, what the plan is for the property. I mean, if the desire is to do something for the task force, build a parking lot out of it and give them a percentage of the revenue from the parking lot from now until the end of time. Giving them way more dollar value than giving away a prime piece of property. There's lots of ways that we could help the task force other than giving away the taxpayers' assets. So I can't support this.
Councillor Powell, Councillor Patterson, Powell, and then Beal.
Thank you, Your Worship. To our CAO. Councillor Oates is right. This is a huge, long time commitment and would require some rezoning. So could I get some feedback from Ms. Comas, please, on perhaps what council should be looking at? Because I think at this point in time, the motion that Councillor Greer has made is too open, and I'm not sure how to proceed and how I feel particularly at this time.
Well, there are several hurdles that I think we would have to look at and council would need to consider before proceeding. First of all, any kind of development of that site would trigger works and services, which would be substantial and expensive, because most of that property is frontage, and it would be along two sides of frontage. Secondly, that building has asbestos in it, and so the remediation of that building, whether it's to be torn down or renovated or whatever they do with it, will require remediation. On top of that, I would like to seek, if council wishes to pursue this, I would like to seek a legal opinion on how best for the city to proceed in order to protect ourselves from future liability, and also to hear from the Oceanside Homelessness Task Force. I think it would be appropriate for them to make a presentation to council on what their plans and what they would be doing with that site before it proceeded. And then again, there's also the cost of development permits. There is the rezoning process. In order for council to be at arm's length with the rezoning process, it would probably be better for whoever acquires the building to be the applicant on that. Whether council chooses to waive fees, that's another decision council would have to make. There are several things that council will legally be required to look at before proceeding with this.
Melissa, you're on the list next, and then there's Councillor Beal. And then Councillor Beal.
And so I have a couple legal questions, and then I have some comments. And so because this is a dispensation of land and somebody has been approached in the public, have we breached the in-camera rules?
It is council's choice whether or not they have this discussion in an open council meeting or a closed council meeting. Our practice has been to discuss the disposition of land and improvements in a closed meeting so that we do not create expectations in the public realm that we may or may not be able to follow through with. With respect to this conversation, it's kind of the horse is out of the barn.
Exactly. And so is it, the second question I have, is it appropriate for a council member, not mentioning any names, to go forward to somebody in the community and offer this suggestion without the rest of council's knowledge? Just answer the question. Yes or no?
You can call it.
It is, yeah. I mean, everybody has, as a person, you have the ability to approach someone and talk to them.
As a person.
As a person. Normally in this, I would say a more common practice would have been to have had a closed meeting, have discussed this as an option, and if council wished to proceed with it, then to request the mayor to go and speak with the appropriate organizations in order to conduct them. With due respect, that would have been a more regular process.
How's that for your first CAO meeting? So I have two or three things. No, I had two questions, and now I want to follow up with this because I feel really uncomfortable, as does Councillor Oates, about learning about this afternoon. It's out in the public. There's nothing we can do about it at this point. So, you know, I absolutely support what the homeless committee does, the task force does, absolutely. The other part of it is works and services. We have forgiven works and services from other low-income housing initiatives. The asbestos remediation is something that we've always talked about, and it'll have to be dealt with whether they do renos or tear it down. The legal opinion, I think, is important. What are our liabilities? The development and rezoning, we've also forgiven for affordable housing. The other piece of it is what is holding up the homelessness task force at this point. As the city rep when it was first initiated, and Mayor Lefebvre came with me, a number of council members came with me at least 3 occasions to talk to the Minister of Housing, BC Housing. And what we heard, the only way they can move forward is if they have land. So you're in a catch-22. If you don't have the land, you can't plan further. You can't plan without the land. And so what we've got now that we're trying to deal with is something that's already out of the gate. We have to make a decision on it. We don't have enough information. What I would like to see is a report from staff giving us all our options, so at least we can have an informed discussion. And it's really unfortunate that it wasn't brought through in camera so we could have had that discussion.
Mrs. Gomez.
Your Worship, if Council wishes, they could pass a motion to refer this resolution back to staff for a further report on the information required.
Sorry, that's what I meant to say.
Councillor, oh, that's the motion. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Oates, discussion on the motion? No debate? Okay. I'm confused with these things. Call a vote. All those in favor? Okay. Just a comment, you know, it's always difficult, and you know, listening to Councillor Powell, we've been frustrated with this thing for a long, long time. And Councillor Powell and I have been to see Warmland in Duncan, and they got a great building, and they got $8 million out of the provincial and federal governments to build that building. And in some ways, you know, it's fair to say to Councillor Greer that, you know, it's sometimes you want to take the bull by the horns, and yeah, the cat's out of the bag. I think that some of the things that we're going to have to look at is getting public input too, because it's something that affects everybody. But in some ways, Councillor Greer, I think that you know, you've thrown the grenade in the room.
Yeah.
The grenade has gone off, so we'll see what happens. That's right. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I did consult with some people before I decided to make a motion. And as far as Renetta was concerned, I had not suggested that we would do it or anything. I really went to see her to see what she was interested in. And she was very interested in that property. So I thought, then that's the property that maybe we should work on. And as far as coming back with a plan, and I agree that it would be good to have her come and make a presentation. I don't think they have any plans. They have to see where the money's coming from and see what they can do. I know they have a considerable amount of money to refurbish it, which I don't think they really want to do. I think they want to build a new building there, which would be a real asset. Anyways, coming from the staff would be great.
And I think that what my understanding is we wait for the report from staff before talking to anybody. We'll have to discuss that, and that meeting may be in camera. Or is it too late? So it's out of camera. But so we don't talk to anybody else on the homelessness committee, or we don't talk about it until at least we've had a chance to listen to the staff report. Okay. Anything else under new business? Any more hand grenades? Any more comments? No. Okay. So, pursuant to Section 91K of the Community Charter, Council proceed to a closed meeting to consider an item relating to negotiations and related discussions respecting the proposed provision of a municipal service. Mover and seconder. Moved by Councillor Powell, seconded by Councillor Beale. We are in camera, and we'll take a 5-minute break.